Imagine for a moment you find a note. Not just any note, but a cryptic message, maybe left behind after someone's death.
And it's written in code so complex, so baffling, that even the world's best code breakers can't figure it out.
That's exactly what we're talking about today. We're going into the really strange and unsettling story of Ricky McCormick.
And specifically, these two pieces of paper found in his pockets when he died, notes that have just stumped experts for, well, decades now.
Yeah, decades. So if you've heard of Ricky McCormick, you know it's this massive true crime puzzle. A body, these weird coded papers, a cipher that just seems to make no sense.
Right. But today we want to do more than just list the facts. We're going to try and untangle some of the really conflicting information out there.
Exactly. Look into the very strange circumstances around his death and explore some of the honestly wild theories about who Ricky McCormick even was.
And maybe the biggest question, what could these notes actually mean, assuming they mean anything?
It's definitely a journey into the unknown. You'll probably end up with more questions than answers, I think.
That tends to happen with this case.
Okay, so let's set the scene. It all starts June 30th, 1999. The body of Ricky McCormick, he was 41 years old, is found.
And not just anywhere. He's found in this remote cornfield way outside St. Louis, Missouri.
And right away, things get weird. This field was, 20 miles or so from where he lived?
Yeah, about that. And here's the thing. Ricky didn't own a car.
No car. And there was no public transport like buses or anything that went out that far into the countryside.
Nope. So the immediate question is, how did he get there?
That's the first big head scratcher, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it only gets stranger when you look at the condition of the body.
Yeah.
The medical examiners estimated he'd probably only been dead for about 3 days before he was found.
Okay, 3 days. This doesn't sound that long, but...
But his body was already in a really advanced state of decomposition. Way more than you typically expect for that time frame.
Wow. Okay. So what did that mean for the investigation?
Well, it made it impossible to figure out the exact cause of death, or even the manner of death.
So, no obvious signs of injury, no weapon?
Nothing. No clear injuries, no struggle apparent, nothing nearby that explained why he died. Just him in the field.
Yet, despite all that uncertainty, the authorities seemed pretty convinced early on.
They treated it as a homicide almost immediately.
Why so certain, with so little physical evidence pointing that way?
Part of it was the location. That specific area, that field, apparently had a reputation, a kind of known spot for dumping bodies, unfortunately.
Grim. Okay, so the location screamed foul play.
Pretty much. And then, of course, there was the clue, the only real clue they found.
The notes.
Exactly. 2 pieces of paper found in his pockets, covered in what the police just described as, seemingly random letters and punctuation.
A trail, but one nobody could follow. It refused to go cold, but it also refused to give up any secrets.
Precisely.
So the local police have these bizarre notes. They try, obviously.
Sure, you'd have to. But they hit a brick wall fast. This wasn't some simple substitution cipher.
Right. It was clear this needed bigger guns. It had to be escalated.
Absolutely. Which is how it ended up with the FBI. Specifically, their Cryptanalysis and Racketeering Records Unit, the CRRU.
These are the top dogs, right? The FBI's best code breakers.
You got it. They handle complex codes, patterns in criminal activity, that sort of thing. Huge amount of experience, amazing track record. They've cracked incredibly tough ciphers before.
But not this one.
Not this one. Even the CRRU couldn't make sense of Ricky's notes. And that, right there, tells you just how unique and difficult this code must be.
And it wasn't like they just glanced at it, right? They worked on it for ages.
Oh, yeah. This wasn't a quick look. It turned into a decade-long stalemate. 10 years.
10 years. Wow. And still nothing.
Still nothing concrete. So after a decade, around 2009, the FBI decided they needed outside eyes.
So they reached out.
They did. They took the notes to the American Cryptogram Association, the ACA.
Okay, who are they?
They're a big organization, been around since the 1930s, full of really sharp, independent code-breaking enthusiasts and experts. Another formidable group.
Let me guess.
Yep, they were stumped too.
Unbelievable. So FBI's best, ACA's best. Nobody could crack it.
Nobody, which just deepened the mystery. The case sat there for another couple of years, defying everyone.
It really suggests these notes are something else entirely, doesn't it? Not your standard code.
Exactly. It's not following any known patterns or systems, apparently.
Which brings us to 2011. And this is where the FBI did something pretty unusual.
Extremely unusual, actually. They decided to ask the public for help.
They just put the notes out there?
Pretty much. They created a dedicated page on the FBI website, fbi.gov, specifically for Ricky McCormick's case and the notes. And amazingly, that page is still live today. You can go look at the notes yourself.
Wow, I remember when that happened. Dan Olson, he was the head of the CRRU back then, right? He made a public statement.
He did. It was quite candid, actually.
Yeah, I had the quote here. He said, "We are really good at what we do, but we could use some help with this one."
Acknowledging they were stuck.
Right. He went on, "Breaking the code could reveal the victim's whereabouts before his death and could lead to the solution of a homicide."
Highlighting the stakes. This wasn't just an academic puzzle.
Exactly. Not every cipher we get arrives at our door under those circumstances. Standard routes of cryptanalysis seem to have hit brick walls. Maybe someone with a fresh set of eyes might come up with a brilliant new idea.
Basically, a crowdsourcing attempt for one of the toughest codes they'd ever seen.
And that plea went out over a decade ago now.
Well over a decade. And here's the kicker.
Still unsolved.
Still completely unsolved. Even with thousands of people, amateur sleuths, other experts looking at it after that public appeal,
Yeah.
nothing. The code remains unbroken.
It really highlights the incredible difficulty, the sheer depth of this puzzle. It's genuinely one of the great unsolved cipher mysteries.
Without a doubt.
Okay, so that difficulty and the FBI's, certainty about certain things leads us into the really murky parts of this story, the conflicting narratives.
Yeah, this is where things get really confusing.
Let's start with the cause of death itself. The FBI says homicide, case closed on that point for them. But is it really that certain?
Well, there's a pretty significant alternative theory. Ricky wasn't in the best health. He had chronic heart and lung problems.
Okay.
And one of the last confirmed sightings of him alive was just 5 days before his body was found. He'd actually checked himself into an ER.
Complaining about those conditions?
Seems likely, yes. So, given his known health issues, and the fact that the medical examiner couldn't determine a cause of death,
It's possible he just died out there.
it's possible maybe he hitchhiked out there for some reason, had a sudden medical event like a heart attack linked to his conditions, and passed away in the field. No murder involved.
That theory seems plausible, especially with lack of injury evidence. But the FBI,
They remain, as you said, dead set on it being a homicide.
why stick to that so firmly? Do they know something they haven't released?
It's possible. Law enforcement often holds back details in ongoing investigations. But you have to think, the sheer amount of time and resources the FBI has poured into this case over 20 plus years.
Yeah, that suggests they strongly believe a crime occurred. They wouldn't do that for natural causes.
Probably not.
Right.
It implies they have reasons, even if undisclosed, to pursue it as a homicide.
Okay, so let's assume, for argument's sake, it was a homicide. That brings us to the notes themselves, and the huge question mark over who wrote them.
Right. The FBI is absolutely certain Ricky wrote them.
Despite the fact that these notes have, quote, stumped the entire world, including cryptanalysts who worked on, World War II codes.
Yes. Their official stance is unwavering. These are Ricky McCormick's personal notes.
Ricky's own family throws a huge wrench into that, doesn't it? Especially his mother.
Oh, absolutely. Her statements are, they're completely contradictory depending on when she was asked and who she was talking to.
Okay, what was the first version?
Initially, back around the time of the FBI's public plea in 2011, there was a New York Times article. Detective Michael Yarbrough, who worked the case, was quoted.
And what did he say Ricky's mother told him?
He said the mother told investigators that her son, Ricky, had written in a secret language since he was a child, but that she had never understood it.
Okay, so that seems to back up the FBI, right? Secret language as a kid.
It would seem to, yes. But then
Things changed.
dramatically. Just a year later, a local St. Louis paper, the Riverfront Times, did this really deep investigation into the case. And they spoke to the mother again.
Yeah.
And in that report, she apparently claimed Ricky was barely literate and intellectually disabled, said he could only really write his name, and anything else was just scribbling.
Scribbling, not a secret code.
Exactly. Other relatives interviewed for that piece described him as maybe having some mental illness, kind of living in his own world, sometimes telling tall tales. Completely different picture from a childhood code writer.
That's a massive contradiction.
Yeah.
How do you square those two accounts from his own mother?
It's incredibly difficult. And there's another layer to this confusion.
What's that?
According to that same Riverfront Times article, the family claims they were never even told about the notes by the police or the FBI.
Never. Not until the public appeal in 2011.
That's what they reported. His mother said she was only told he had some ER tickets in his pockets when they found him.
But wait, if the FBI was so sure Ricky wrote them, and they even said publicly they needed more samples of his code, why wouldn't they have asked the family right at the start, Hey, do you recognize this? Did Ricky write like this? Do you have any other examples?
That is the logical question, isn't it? It seems like a major procedural gap if the family's account to the Riverfront Times is accurate. Why wait over a decade to ask?
But didn't Detective Yarbrough say in the New York Times piece that they did ask the family? And that the mother did confirm the childhood code?
He did. That's the core of the contradiction. We have the detective saying one thing in a national paper, and the family, including the mother, saying something very different in a local paper a year later, including that they weren't even told about the notes initially.
So what gives? Is it bad reporting by one of the papers? Or was the investigation messy? Miscommunication?
It's impossible to say for sure from the outside. It could be flawed reporting, flawed memory, or maybe flawed investigating. The conflicting accounts are just part of the fog around this case.
Yet despite all this back and forth from the family, the FBI, particularly Dan Olson at CRRU, stuck to their guns.
They did. Even when faced with the mother's later statements about him being barely literate, Olson was quoted again saying, "I have every confidence that Ricky wrote the notes."
What was his reasoning?
He said, "They are done in more of a format of something written to oneself than something written to someone else," implying it looked like personal shorthand or journaling, not a message for others.
Interesting. And didn't the FBI website itself initially mention the family confirming his code use?
It reportedly did back in 2011 when the page first went up. But that specific mention about the family corroboration has apparently been removed since then.
Just adding another layer of weirdness, shifting sands, like you said.
Exactly. The official narrative seems to have subtly changed over time regarding the family's input.
Okay, so given all these huge contradictions about who Ricky was and whether he could even write this stuff, what are the other possibilities for these notes?
Well, let's think outside the box a bit. One theory, leaning on the family's later statements, is that they are just meaningless.
Random scribbles from someone maybe struggling with mental health issues, like the mother suggested.
That's the idea. But, and this is a big but, the experts at the FBI and the ACA, these are people trained to tell the difference between random marks and something with underlying structure or intent.
And what do they say?
Their consensus is pretty firm. These notes are not random. They believe there is a system. They are solvable, even if nobody's figured out how yet.
Okay, so the experts push back hard against the random scribbling idea. What about, say, a customized shorthand?
That's another possibility. Not a complex cipher, maybe, but a deeply personal system of abbreviations or symbols that only Ricky understood, like a diary only he could read.
Seems plausible for something written to oneself, as Olson put it.
It is plausible, but again, you'd think that top-tier cryptanalysts would at least be able to identify it as a system, a form of shorthand, even if they couldn't decode the specifics. Yet it seems to defy even that level of classification.
Still elusive. Okay, what if the notes are code, they are solvable, but Ricky didn't write them?
Now that opens up some darker possibilities. Could they have been planted?
Planted by his killer?
Maybe. But then you have to ask, why? What's the motive for leaving a baffling, undecipherable code on your victim?
Yeah, that doesn't make much sense. A taunt, a misdirection, a calling card. It feels overly complicated.
It does. It adds intrigue but doesn't offer a clear motive. Unless the notes aren't about Ricky's death, but something else entirely.
Which leads us to the idea that maybe Ricky was involved in something bigger, something dangerous.
Exactly. There are threads suggesting this wasn't just a random guy who met a bad end. In the weeks before he died, there were suspicions he might have been involved in drug trafficking.
Really? Where'd that come from?
Reports mention him taking trips down to Florida, which raised flags. And the Riverfront Times investigation dug up more.
What else?
They reported that while many thought Ricky was unemployed or just did odd jobs, he might have actually been working, perhaps unofficially, at a local gas station.
Oh, okay.
And the owners of that gas station were apparently known locally for some shady dealings.
So the theory connects Ricky to potentially criminal elements through his work.
Right. It paints a picture where maybe Ricky wasn't a major player, but perhaps a low-level carrier or courier, transporting drugs, money, maybe even coded information for others.
And codes are still used in criminal communication, right? To avoid detection.
Absolutely. It's still a common practice. So if Ricky was caught up in that world, maybe the notes relate to those activities, not necessarily his murder directly. Or maybe his murder was a result of getting tangled up.
Did investigators ever look into specific criminal connections?
They did. At one point, an anonymous informant actually pointed the finger at a specific person.
Oh.
A known local drug dealer, also a suspected murderer, named Gregory Knox. The informant claimed Knox killed Ricky.
Okay, did they pursue that lead?
They tried, but ultimately they couldn't gather enough evidence to definitively link Knox to Ricky's death.
And Knox himself?
He denied any involvement, claimed he didn't even really know Ricky or anything about the situation. So like so many other leads in this case.
Another dead end.
Exactly, just another frustrating dead end.
So after all this, where does it leave us? Where does it leave you, the listener?
Well, it leaves us with a whole lot more questions than answers, unfortunately.
Yeah. This deep dive really just underscores what an enduring mystery the Ricky McCormick case is. Even with decades of work by the FBI, by code breakers, we're still largely in the dark.
It's a powerful reminder that some puzzles just resist being solved. The code itself remains active, unsolved. The FBI still lists it, hoping someone, somewhere, might have that flash of insight.
It really speaks to the idea that maybe some codes are just too personal, too unique. Or maybe the truth they hold is something so unexpected, we just haven't considered it.
It definitely keeps you wondering about the limits of our ability to understand, doesn't it?
It does. And here's maybe a final thought to leave you with. If these notes were written by Ricky, and if they do contain the key that he can, maybe the route he took, maybe the name of his killer. What does it truly say that they remain uncracked after all this time? Is it a failure of our best analytical minds? Or is it a testament to the incredible intimacy, the deep privacy of a language known perhaps only to one person?
A language that died with him?
Maybe. It's truly a puzzle for the ages, something for you to definitely ponder.